This is What's the Deal with the Minor Prophets in the Bible. It'll be part one, and we're going to deal with the prophet Hosea. Today we're going to delve into the fascinating world of the Old Testament's minor prophets. Now don't let that term minor fool you, though. It's not about their importance, but rather about the length of the book. They're short. Now these prophets, well, they were the voice of God, and they really knew how to shake things up. They give us an incredible insight into the spiritual landscape and the history of Israel from back in the day. Okay, let's kick things off here with Hosea. Now he lived in the northern kingdom of Israel, around 200 years after the whole kingdom split into two, with Israel up north and Judah down south. Now before we get into it, let's quickly catch up with the backstory. We first meet Hosea in 1 Kings, where he speaks on behalf of God during the reign of one of Israel's most, well, let's just call him interesting kings, Jeroboam II. But that's a story for another time. Now at this point, things were taking a nosedive in Israel. The rich were getting richer, but the poor suffering, well, it increased dramatically. Then in the year 722 before Christ, the Assyrians showed up and they completely wrecked Israel. Now who were these Assyrians, you ask? Well, they were an ancient empire that ruled a huge chunk of the world. Now we're talking about Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, and even Turkey. Now these guys were no joke. They were a military powerhouse that reached far and wide, even extending their rule over Israel and Judah. Now from the 9th to the 7th century before Christ, well, they were the big dogs in town. All right, let's get back to Hosea. Now his book covers about 25 years of its preaching and writing, mostly in the form of poetry. The story gets right into it in chapter 1, verse 2, where God tells Hosea, "You go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. Just like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." Now that sounds like a recipe for disaster, but you know what? Hosea goes along. He does what he's told, and he marries a woman named Gomer. Now, surprise, surprise, she cheats on him. They still manage to have 3 kids before the wheels fall off the cart. But here's the kicker. God tells Hosea that despite Gomer's unfaithfulness, he needs to go and find her now, pay off her debts to her lovers, and then to show her love and faithfulness once again. Say what? Well, this whole marriage saga is actually a symbolic message from God about his relationship with Israel throughout history. God himself describes them in chapter 4, verse 2. There is no faithfulness or steadfast love, and no knowledge of God in the land. There's swearing, lying, murder, stealing, committing adultery. They break all the bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. Gotta tell you, it can't get much worse than that. But here's the thing, God chose them as his people, and he's always been faithful to them. He saved them from slavery and made a covenant with them at Mount Sinai. And all he asked in return was for them to be loyal to him and to him alone. But then what do? Well, they go and worship other gods, especially this Canaanite deity, name of Baal. And no, I didn't stutter, it's Baal. So you see, Hosea's story isn't just about him and Gomer. It's an incredible parallel between the relationship of God and Israel. It's a reminder that no matter how unfaithful we are, well, God's love and faithfulness, it never wavers. Now here's the next deal. Hosea, he's given the ancient Israelites a reality check. He's like, hey guys, you're in a heap of trouble. Well, because they've been foolishly putting their trust in a political alliance with Egypt and Assyria, instead of relying on God. Now Hosea predicts that the Assyrians, the very nation that they're relying on for security, is going to turn on them and wreak havoc to their lands. Talk about a major backfire. But wait, there's more. Hosea decides to give them a history lesson to prove his point. He goes all the way back to Genesis, and he brings up Jacob's lying and his treachery. Then he jumps to the book of Numbers and reminds them of Israel's rebellion in the wilderness. And boy, oh boy, don't even get me started on the appointment of their corrupt King Saul in 1 Samuel. Essentially what Hosea is saying is that this family of Israel, well, they've been unfaithful for like ever. They just keep going back to their evil ways. You know, some things never change. Okay, so here's the juicy part. Amidst all this hopelessness, well, Hosea throws in a glimmer. In chapter 11, he paints this beautiful picture of God as a loving father who raises his son Israel, showering him with everything. But then guess what? The son grew up and rebelled, taking advantage of his dad's generosity. Talk about a roller coaster of emotions. One moment, God is furious, promising that there would be consequences. And then in the next minute, well, he's heartbroken and he's ready to forgive and forget because he loves his son so darn much. It's an emotional journey, folks. But here's the twist. God still allows Israel to be conquered by the Assyrians as a consequence to their foolish actions. Yes, sir, God will bring down judgment on sin. But don't worry too much because he'll always bring his people back to himself. So Hosea urges Israel to repent and turn back to God, even though he knows deep down that won't last. Because with Israel, it never lasts. But here's what's awesome. God promises to heal their waywardness and to love them freely. Now, he imagines Israel as this lush tree with deep roots and broad branches that provides shade and fruit to all the nations. It's like God's promise to Abraham, where Israel was meant to bless all the nations. But hold up. What's the deal of this fixing the brokenness and the selfishness of the human heart? Well, I tell you what, that's going to require some miraculous act of God's grace and his healing power. Let's face it, humans are pretty hopeless at fixing themselves. We're of a fallen nature. Now, at the end of it all, Hosea drops some serious truth bombs about God's character and purpose, and about the nature of us humans. He makes it clear that those who are wise and discerning will see just how right God's ways are. But the rebellious ones, well, they're going to trip and fall, my friends. So let me ask you, when was the last time you rebelled? You thought you had it all together, you knew it better than God, and you decided to go on your own way. Maybe you even turned your back on the church. Well, how'd that work for you? Yeah, that's what I thought. Now, Hosea's message is timeless, and it's still also relevant to us today. It's all about God's passionate love for his people. Even when we mess up big time, it's a call for us to turn back to him and experience his mercy and blessings. So consider this a heads up. No matter how badly we screw up, if we're truly sorry and give our hearts to God, he'll forgive us and he'll embrace us in his loving arms. Pretty darn amazing, right? Well, thanks a bunch for tuning in, and we'll catch you next Wednesday. Until then, may God bless you and keep you safe.